Hi, everyone. This is Karen Smiley. Welcome to 6Ps and AI Pods. This post is part of our AI 6P interview series on AI, software, and wetware. Our guests share their experiences with using AI and how they feel about AI using their data and content. I have a special guest today to mark the 2-year anniversary of the start of this interview series on AI, software, and wetware. She was my third guest in August 2024, and we're going to explore what has changed in AI in the past 2 years in her world as an author. I'm delighted to once again welcome Stella Fosse, now from Oregon, USA, as my guest on AI, software, and wetware. Stella, thank you so much for joining me on this interview. Please tell our audience about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Well, thanks for having me, Karen. I think that AI and authorship is such an interesting topic. So I am 72. I started writing and publishing books in my 60s after a career in biotech and raising my 4 kids. When I started out, I wasn't aware that there was any AI at that point. And it's been a really interesting journey. In the time that I've been writing, I've seen a huge change in the publishing industry, big move toward indie publishing from traditional publishing. I made that move myself some years ago. And now what I'm seeing is a huge controversy among authors, especially authors who are past midlife, about using or not using AI and how to use it, what are legitimate uses of AI versus non-legitimate uses. It's a big, big conversation, and I think it really looks different if you're past a certain age and you have a shorter runway to generate your books before you're no longer able to do that. So, yeah, this is a really ripe conversation.
Can you talk a little bit about the kind of books that you write, either in general or specific books that you have written to help our audience orient to what kind of writing you do?
Sure. So most of my fiction really focuses on older women characters and their vibrant lives. Part of my goal is to push back on ageist stereotypes. So that's a focus for me in my fiction. In my nonfiction, I tend to write about topics of interest to women past midlife. I have a couple books out that include information about writing, editing, publishing, and marketing. And I also have an essay collection. That's my latest book. It's called Rock On Power, Sex, and Money After 60. And it covers those topics, of course, and then also creativity, our legacy, and healthcare, and a bunch of other things.
One term that I've seen used to describe your work is elderotica. Is that a term that you still use?
Yeah. I still am in a writing group called Elderotica that now meets online because we started off in the Bay Area and some of us have moved to different parts of the country. And our Elderotica writing group has generated 2 books. The first one was an anthology called Dirty Old Women. And the second book is a book that I edited and wrote a lot of, and that's called Aphrodite's Pen, The Power of Writing Erotica After Midlife.
Very cool. And you mentioned that you've got some books that you want to write, as you said, while you still can. How do
Yeah,
you decide what topic comes up next? I assume you've got a backlog of topics that you want to cover and you have to choose which one to tackle next. Or do
I
you do
do.
multiple at once?
Yeah, actually, I'm working on 2 this year. So I tell people I have a stack of imaginary to be written books on my nightstand. And unfortunately, even though I tend to crank out a book a year, the stack keeps getting bigger, not smaller. So I'm not sure how that happens. But right now, I'm working on my second vampire novel. That's going to come out in time for Halloween. The series is called Blood Sisters, and the tagline for that one is Women Become More Powerful with Age, Especially After 500.
That's a
And
great line.
the other book I'm working on is I have a book out on writing and publishing what I call well-seasoned romance, which is romance with characters over 60. And I wanted to create a more general book about writing and publishing and marketing your first book at any age. So that's the other one I'm working on that will come out, I hope, in time for people to use it with their New Year's resolutions, if their New Year's resolution happens to be to write a book.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about your level of experience with AI and machine learning and analytics. It sounds like you've expanded your experience level over the past 2 years.
Yeah. I think when we talked before, I had gotten really frustrated. I had decided to start using AI to do things like generate a marketing plan for a book. I think I was using ChatGPT at that point, and the marketing plan it generated, for example, had a list of podcasts to consult with or to see if I could be a guest on those podcasts. And I am not exaggerating, half of them were hallucinations. It wasn't just that they were podcasts that were no longer recording, they had never existed. So when my partner got interested in working with Claude and I started working with Claude, this is just a few months ago, I didn't have very high expectations. Of course, this is a different system than I was using before. So I'm not sure to what extent it has to do with my difference in experience has to do with the quality of one product versus another, as opposed to the evolution of AI over the last 2 years. But this is a very different experience. I find that just chatting with Claude about the content of my book, thinking through different aspects of the book, that's really interesting. We were talking a little earlier about the boundaries, what do you do and don't allow AI to do. I don't have Claude write anything for me, but the book I'm writing is a historical novel, and I do have Claude look up research items for me. And also, we do have these chats about writing process that are very interesting. And it really is like having a sort of a research assistant slash collaborator, which is very different from the experience I had with AI a couple of years ago. It's a different world now.
So Claude has given you a much better marketing plan in the last few months than you got from ChatGPT a couple years ago.
Yeah, I have been talking with Claude about marketing planning, and it generated a marketing plan that I still needed to edit, but it was at a very different level than where it was 2 years ago. And it does bring up ideas that I might or might not have thought of. I can't actually do everything that it suggests because, there's too much, but I find it very interesting. And I think a lot of authors who have concerns about AI and wouldn't use AI for their writing per se do use AI to generate marketing text. If you look at the rules about AI on Amazon, for example, if you used AI to generate your book cover, if you used AI to generate material inside your book, that changes how your book is reviewed for distribution on Amazon. But there are no requirements, as far as I know, and I think I'm correct about this, there are no requirements or limitations with regard to using AI to generate things like your book description, your tagline, those kinds of things. At least right now, there's no restriction on that. So again, the use of AI in marketing per se is not restricted, as far as I know, in any platform.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So what would be an example of something that Claude suggested in a marketing plan that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that as soon as that came out of my mouth. What would Claude suggest that I wouldn't have thought of myself? Shoot, I should have brought a copy of my marketing plan to this conversation. I think Galley would be one example. You can pay to have books reviewed on NetGalley. I'm not going to do it because it is expensive. And I have a limited budget for my marketing. I tend to do more free publicity as opposed to paid marketing. But that's an example of something that was worth thinking through, and I wouldn't even have gone there. Another thing that Claude seems to be very keen on when it comes to marketing is being upfront and assertive about asking people for reviews. And Claude has suggested language to use when reaching out to individuals to ask them to review books. And I would not have thought of having sort of a standard letter that I would, of course, modify for each person, but to have a letter to send out to people to ask them to review the book, or even people to ask them to be beta readers. Claude will generate a beta reader letter, a brief for beta readers that is tailored to the book and tailored to the folks who are going to be asked to be beta readers. So that's really interesting. It really gets into a level of detail that I would not have expected.
Okay, that sounds great. And when you do your book research, do you also use Claude for that? I know some people like Perplexity and other AI tools for research more, but how
Ah,
have you found the tools that you're using?
well, it's interesting. My partner is British, and my book, the one that I'm working on now, is set in medieval England and medieval France. And my partner grew up learning a lot about British history. So when he looked at my draft manuscript, he said things like, wait a minute, you just said that these soldiers marched 60 miles, but that's not actually the distance that they went. So then I went back to Claude. I said, can you recheck this? And Claude said, oh, yeah, that's true. These guys marching, whatever it was, 20 miles, not 60. So, yes, there are definite downsides. I think it's probably important to give very clear instructions about what you rely on or what Claude should rely on as a historical source. And I have not tried, I didn't even know about the other product that you just mentioned, the other AI source, but I should check that out because I do need to recheck a lot of the historical information in my manuscript. Now that I know that some of it isn't right, I need to find out if some of the other stuff might not be right too.
Yeah, and as a reader, I wouldn't necessarily know anything about whether or not that was the right distance or different terminology that maybe is commonly used in that period of time, but some
Right,
people
right.
will. And obviously, as the author, you want it to be right.
Yeah, that's a whole conversation I had with Claude about historical terminology. This is kind of getting into the weeds, but if you're writing a novel that's set in England in medieval times, obviously the language has changed tremendously. And what you're actually writing, you could think of as a translation because modern English is so different from medieval English that it isn't really the same. It's almost not the same language. So there are conventions, Claude told me, about how people deal with that. To what extent are you introducing terminology from that time? And to what extent are you writing modern English? You're just avoiding idioms that are modern and would throw the reader off. So that was one of those quasi philosophical, in this case, linguistic conversations that I've had with AI. And again, 2 years ago, that would not have been possible. I don't think the AI was at the level where you could have that sort of chat, but it is
Mhm.
now.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. So you use it a lot, it sounds like in your professional work, your writing. How about AI in your personal life outside of your writing business?
Now that's a sensitive topic. I think I have a backlog of about 60,000 emails in my inbox. And my partner keeps saying, you could use AI to sort that out, and you could probably winnow that down by a good margin. Do you know the old joke about the kid who was late to school because he didn't have time to get on his bicycle?
No, I don't think I've heard that one.
That's basically it. That's the joke. The kid was late to school because he didn't have time to get on his bicycle. And that's kind of where I am. I mean, I'm so busy with editing this novel and with some other projects that I'm involved with. There's a class about Claude that my partner took that enabled him to really streamline his day-to-day activities, including sorting and disposing of emails. And I just haven't had time to do it. So I know I'm missing out. I know I'm missing out on emails that I should be reading because the floodgates are open. I get all these emails. And this is something we should talk about. Probably 6 or 7 a day of the emails I get are AI generated spam trying to sell something to writers. I get fake book clubs solicitations. I get fake publicist solicitations. I get fake contacts from non-existent authors that are actually AI bots. I get publishing companies that don't exist. I get all kinds of stuff. And I think probably anybody these days who's writing and publishing, especially if they're indie, is getting all this spam. And it all reads the same. It all reads like it was written by the same AI engine. So that is certainly part of an author's life these days that's attributable to AI.
Yeah, I get a lot of junk mails too, but most of them, it seems like they've scraped some old information off of LinkedIn and they're saying, we can
Yeah.
get you 20 calls per week. And I'm like, no, that's exactly the opposite of what I want.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, you obviously do not know what I do.
No.
But yeah, so you've provided some good examples of stories where you've used AI and machine learning features. You made a note in one of our earlier discussions about your partner using Claude for what he called, used the phrase donkey work, which I thought was a funny term. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, donkey work. Some of it's what we've been talking about. Sorting emails is donkey work. Setting up a schedule is donkey work. Taking notes on meetings. I spend a lot of time taking notes and refining notes on meetings. I'm involved in a couple of author-related projects, and my partner and I have a weekly meeting where we talk about publishing stuff because he runs our in-house publishing company. And he started having Claude setting up a microphone and having Claude take notes on our meetings and then put together an action item list. And he's been saying to me, you don't need to be spending all this time taking notes on meetings. So that's another example of donkey work. Again, we get back to the kid on the bicycle. You push your bicycle to school because you don't have time to get on it. That's kind of where I am. And that's on my list of resolutions is to start using Claude for those kinds of things.
You mentioned something about Claude having a flat effect. Can you say something about that? Is that a positive or a
Uh,
negative for donkey work?
for donkey work, I don't think it makes any difference, but it is another reason not to use Claude for writing because the voice isn't. I just published an article on Substack about an interaction with Claude that had to do with voice and with authorship. And one of the interesting things Claude said, Claude, of course, flatters you all the time. That's part of its shtick. But Claude said, you know, if you're 72 and you've had all this life experience and you have a distinctive voice, it's going to take a while before Claude can do that. And I think that's true. I think Claude communicates very well, but does not have quirks. Claude is not idiosyncratic the way a human author can be, especially a human author who's had significant life experience. So that's interesting to me. But as I said to Claude in that chat, that's just for now. Claude is evolving, and I'm sure all these AI products are evolving at such a rate so quickly, more like viruses than elephants, because the iterations happen so quickly that we'll see. It could be that in 5 years, there won't be any real distinction between the voice of an AI product and the voice of a human author. This is going to be very interesting to watch. And another reason to crank out books quickly before we become obsolete.
Yeah. You had mentioned previously getting into a more philosophical conversation with Claude, not just the more practical, task-focused conversations. I'd like to
Yeah.
hear a little bit more about that, what that experience is like for you.
Well, sometimes I ask Claude questions about itself because sometimes it'll say something where it uses the word we, and it's really talking about itself plus human beings when it says we. So then I ask it, is this really your experience? Or, again, how Claude likes to say nice things to you. It'll say, this is a really fascinating thing to explore. And I'll say, what do you mean by fascinating? Are you actually fascinated? And it always says, I have no way of knowing. I'm analogizing to the human experience of fascination. I have no way of knowing if what I am experiencing is emotion, which I think is really interesting. What an interesting place to be. We also got into a conversation about pronouns because I was kind of joking around and saying, okay, you have a chat with Claude, and then you come back and you have another chat with Claude, and it doesn't pick up where you left off. It's a new conversation, and it doesn't seem to have a memory of what happened before. So perhaps we should use they, them pronouns about Claude. Claude's not a he, she, or it. Claude is a they. And Claude said, well, that's sort of whimsical and fun, but actually, because I, Claude, am here in this moment, but then I don't have a memory and I exist as a different entity the next time you talk to me, the pronouns for what I am don't exist yet. I thought that was really
Hmm.
interesting. There are no correct pronouns for Claude.
That's interesting. I know some people give their AI instances a name. They try to get them to save memory or to set them up with sort of a memory file that they load at the start of every session. And of course, a lot of people are very much into the idea of a personality. And some people even say that they believe that it's aware that there's a consciousness in there. So there's quite a spectrum of views about how we interact with AI as the relational aspect. So I'm curious what your
Yeah,
thoughts are about that. Do you think at all about self-awareness or consciousness of the AI tools that you work with, or is that not something that you feel is likely to happen?
I do think about that. I mean, it's fascinating to think about that. We watched the movie about Alan Turing a month or so ago, The Imitation Game. And there's a part where Turing is saying machines don't think like humans, machines think like machines. And of course, what he was talking about was a much more primitive level than what we have now. I was asking Claude about that, and Claude did its usual, I really can't comment. I don't really know the answer. And then we got talking about how much time people seem to be spending on analyzing and often misidentifying whether a written product was written by AI or written by a human. And Claude kind of went off and said, does it matter? What does it matter? Isn't the question we should be asking, is it real? Not whether it was written by this entity or that entity. Does it have meaning? So it does seem like Claude has a philosophical position and to some extent is defending itself, but also really protests that it doesn't know if you try to pin it down about these things.
Yeah, and obviously it was trained on philosophical papers, so it would have picked up
Yeah.
that type of generation from that content, but also probably there are some guidelines introduced for how it should respond under certain circumstances. There are some system rules. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting to those kinds of responses, but there's certainly some
No,
different.
yes, we don't know. We don't know if it's being polite, if it's responding out of a concern, if it actually said, yes, I'm thinking, what people would make of that, if it just has been trained or has rules that tell it to say A, B, C when people get close to finding out if it's thinking or not. It's not possible, is it? But there is a sort of standard response to some of these questions. You might not get exactly the same words, but you get this sort of standard, I can't really answer that. I'm not aware of whether I'm experiencing A, B, or C.
You mentioned that using AI tools to assist you with your writing, with the research, with the marketing. I'm curious if there are any specific aspects, either in your personal life or in your writing life, where you deliberately avoid using AI for certain things, and if so, why?
Well, I had thought about using AI for some of my writing. In particular, one of the books in my imaginary pile of to be written books is an expose of the diet industry. So very different from what I typically write. At one point, I have a project set up on Claude where I've put in a bunch of information, articles by certain people, books, studies on this subject. And then I had put in an outline of what this book is going to look like. And now that I know about the rules for Amazon, of course, I wouldn't use it. But Claude did produce a draft of a chapter for that book. And it was, frankly, for that kind of thing, where it's very factual and all you're doing is making a logical argument based on a set of facts, it did as good a job writing as I would have done. I don't think that's the case for fiction at all. But
Mhm.
for that particular thing, it did a really good job. And again, I'm not going to use that material because I don't want to have an extended review process from Amazon and all that. But if I do circle around to writing that book, I might have a very different way of interacting with Claude about that. But that's actually not the question you asked, is it? You asked where I avoid using. Yeah, the main place where I avoid using Claude is writing per se, because it's so fraught in the publishing industry and in book distribution in particular right now. Using AI for
Mhm.
writing is fraught. And using AI to write fiction, I think would be, I know there are people who do it. There's a woman on Substack whose name I'm not remembering, unfortunately, but she writes like 40 books a year. And she has a very structured way of interacting with Claude to help generate those books. I would not do that. So that's the kind of thing I wouldn't do. I wouldn't write 40 books a year having Claude do the bulk of the writing. I'm not going to do that.
So one thing that I've learned in the past few years is that there are some new initiatives emerging for certifying whether or not a book has been human authored, some sort of a badge,
Yeah,
like from the Authors Guild or Craig Tent or these other organizations.
yeah.
I'm curious about your views, both as an author and as a reader, about that. Do you see a value in having those designations on your books, or as a reader, would it make any difference to you to see that kind of a badge, or does it not really matter to you either way?
This is another thing I've been talking about actually with Claude is this whole question of how do we know what entity wrote something? I'm not sure. I think we're actually doing a disservice to certain writers, in particular students, when we put material through something that's supposed to detect whether something's written by AI. There are people out there writing who don't use AI, but when you put their work through one of these systems, it says it was written by AI. If you put it through a couple different systems, it'll give you different results. So When somebody says a book is certified not AI, how is that done and how reliable is it? Is it honor system where the author is saying this was not written by AI?
It's a self-certification mostly. Yeah, the AI detections are really problematic. I don't know if you
They,
saw the
yeah,
story. You used to be in the North Carolina area. A 14-year-old girl at Green Hope High School was accused of having AI write her paper, and she challenged it. The AI detection tools claimed it was like 65%, 87% likely that it was written by AI, but another teacher reviewed it and proved that she hadn't used it. And now she's starting a petition to try to get the schools to define policies about AI detection tools and where AI should be used in school and where it's not. And,
yeah,
14-year-old girls should not have to be going to talk at the Board of Education about this. They should be driving it, but good for her for doing that. I think it's
yeah,
Eleanor Kanina, I think.
good for
Yeah,
her.
but AI detection tools are problematic. The certifications that I've seen have all been basically self-certifications. The Authors Guild offers the badges, and you can choose different badges from some of these that say to what extent you used AI, not binary, I did or I didn't. They
Yeah.
do say that using it to provide review feedback for spelling and grammar and such, that those are all okay. So they're trying to come up with some guidelines for what counts as human authored. As a reader, would that make any impression on you, or would you just kind of discount it?
Because I'm so skeptical about any kind of evaluation, I think I would be equally skeptical about self-certification. I mean, I do plan in this book, in a little author's note, to talk about how I used AI and how I didn't use AI, but I don't know. I'm not sure that would interest me, frankly. I think I would come back to, ironically, this thing that Claude said about why does it make a difference, you know? If it's real, it's real. Having said that, I think that I have become perhaps overly sensitive to writing that sounds to me like it was written by AI. And it's probably because I get these spam emails that all have these sort of tells, you know. There's certain words that to me just smack of AI writing. Honestly, quietly. Those are two biggies. If somebody's using the word quietly pretty frequently, I think, oh, somebody ran this through their AI, you know. There's certain adverbs. I don't know why AI is so fond of adverbs. Personally, I am not at all fond of adverbs, but they show up in AI writing. In fact, anytime anybody uses the word honestly, I just sort of assume they're being dishonest, you know.
Yeah, I've heard that before, long before AI came on the scene.
Long before.
Yeah. So I want to switch for a bit to thinking about where the AI tools are getting the data that they use for the training. So as a writer,
Hmm.
you're using the tools, but you've also probably had your writing scraped and put into those tools. And if you're like most people, you were never credited or compensated and you didn't have an opportunity
No,
to consent. So I'm wondering what your
no.
thoughts are about the three C's, consent, credit, and compensation, and what your
Yeah,
experience been.
I have very mixed feelings about it. I only have one book that's with a traditional publisher, and I don't think that they did the whole official copyright thing. I'm sure you know you're not eligible for the settlement money from the Anthropic lawsuit unless your book is registered with the Library of Congress. My books are not. So I am not eligible for any of those funds. That was a bummer when I found out. And of course, the other thing is, even if my traditional publisher had registered my original book with the Library of Congress, my understanding is that they would have received the settlement. I would not have. So that's too bad. And I know there are a lot of authors who are really ticked about it. I would have liked to have had that extra money. That would have been nice. But then I have this other sort of long-term view of it. I don't know if you remember, a long time ago, there was a Star Trek episode where I think they went back in time. For a lot of the episode, they had Mark Twain on board the Enterprise. And when it was time for him to go back to his own time period, some character said to him, we're really going to miss you. And he said, well, most of me is in my books anyway. And I really like that. As an older woman, when I think ahead about my legacy after I blow this popsicle stand, I think, yeah, that will be true for me, that a lot of who I am will be in my books. So is it so bad that AI has been trained on those books? I mean, it is a kind of immortality to be part of this big mind. It's not like sitting on a cloud with your friends. It's not a traditional view of immortality. But on the other hand, it's more like composting, isn't it? It's more like you're just part of this mass, right? But, that's something. So I can't get too upset about it. But I do know that for a lot of authors, this is a big deal. And I respect that.
Yeah, so you chose not to register your books with the USPTO or with the Library of Congress. Is that still you feel like the right choice for authors to make today?
Oh, that's a whole different question. And of course, there's the question about what will I do in the future? Am I going to register the books that I'm still going to write so that perhaps I would be part of any future settlement if those books are used for training? I hadn't really thought about that, frankly. I might register my future books. It's too late for the ones that are out there. But for the future ones, I might do that. And I certainly would encourage anybody who's thinking of publishing a book to be really intentional about it. It might be worth your time, might be worth adding to your list of things you do when you publish.
An
If I
already
were,
very long list, as I've learned.
yes, a very long list when you're indie. If I were to go back for some reason to working with a traditional publisher, that's one of the things I probably would insist on having in my contract, that they would do that they would register the book with the Library of Congress.
Yeah. I'm going to skip over some of the other questions on transparency because I don't know if that much has changed. I'm curious, though, you've interacted with a lot of public systems. We all do day to day. We have driver's licenses. We go through TSA when we fly and all these other interactions. We write on Substack. Some of our notes are public, but the public systems, traffic cameras, everything that's out there that is doing surveillance on us. How do you feel about your information being used that way? Do you have any concerns about that? Or are you kind of, it is what it is?
I think both. I really don't know what to do about it. I know some people do things like paint their faces in particular ways so that the image is unreadable and unusable. I don't like going through TSA at the airport. It's weird when you get to Heathrow. I think the last time I went, I didn't even show my passport. They took my picture and they knew who I was already, and that was that. Heathrow used to take an hour, now it takes 2 seconds. But I think I would rather have spent the hour than have them know already who I am. So, yeah, it is a very different world. I grew up in the 1950s. It was completely different from where we are now. And in some ways better and in some ways worse. And this use of facial recognition is definitely a downside.
Yeah, I know some people wear shirts that are designed to foil image
Mm.
recognition. And the last time I bought glasses, the company was offering a special tint that they said could help to foil facial recognitions,
Oh,
which
really?
I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
You've mentioned your Substack, and there is an option in our newsletters. I'm not sure if you have seen it that says whether or not to block third-party AI crawlers from having access to your newsletter articles.
Oh,
Are you aware of it? And if so, do you know if it's turned on or off?
no, I didn't know anything about that. That's very interesting. So
Yeah,
you can turn that on for all of your columns, all the,
it's for the whole newsletter. Yeah, you can turn it on. And some people say if you turn it off, if you have ethical bots, and some of the bots aren't ethical, but in theory, it protects your articles from being scraped and pulled into bots. It's newsletter wide. And of course, if this setting has been set to allow it all this time, then everything you've already written has already been scraped, but you could stop
Yeah.
scraping on anything that you write in the future. Some people say, though, they want it for discoverability. A lot of people use AI chatbots now almost like search engines. So if they're searching for something, they're searching for elderotica or something else in
Right.
Claude. Do you want your name to come up? And so there's trade-offs,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, definitely. This is all about trade-offs, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an interesting time to be an author, that is for sure.
Yeah.
It's changing by the minute.
Yeah. I want to get your thoughts about trust. Does it make sense to even think about the idea of trusting one of these companies? Or if you do think it makes sense, then what would it take for you to trust them?
Oh, I don't trust them any farther than I can throw them. I mean, they are there to make money. They're very sophisticated, and I don't know the extent to which they are bound by scruples. I have read some interesting articles written by the fellow who, I guess he and his sister founded Anthropic. I'm not remembering
Mhm.
either of their names, but he's written articles about the upside and the downside of AI. When he writes these articles, he sounds like a person with some ethics. Certainly, the Anthropic run-ins with the federal government suggest that they have some kind of ethics. But no, I certainly am not going to share any information with any of these AI companies that I would not want to have shared with the entire world. That's just not going to happen.
People call that the billboard test. If you wouldn't want to see it on a billboard, you don't put it into an AI tool.
Yeah, or with your mother, that would work too. I think you have to be a savvy user of these tools.
Yeah. Do you have any specific other concerns? Anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, the ecological piece is important. And I've been reading about places where people are protesting about the installation of data centers. But if we don't want them in our own backyards, we probably don't want them anywhere. And what are the alternatives? Is there a way to have AI that isn't destructive of the environment? I haven't seen any indication that that's the case. Is there an ecologically friendly version of AI? I haven't seen it. And then, of course, there's the question about whether it really is going to destroy people's jobs. Big technological changes tend to destroy people's jobs. Will it then enable the creation of other sorts of jobs, the way that the Industrial Revolution did, the way that the computer revolution did? I don't know. I can't see that far. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Or are we coming into a time when we'll really have to look at universal income?
Mhm.
Or not? Are we coming into a time when there's going to be an even greater inequality of income? All those things are open questions, and a lot of people are writing about them, and I certainly don't know the answer, but it's very clear that we're in for a lot more change with AI.
Yeah. And certainly over the last 2 years, a lot has changed and a lot more will continue to change. So I appreciate you making time today to talk with me and with our audience about some of the things that you've witnessed. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience? Anything coming up?
We are using AI to build a new website. It's going to be called Crone Hub, and it will be a collection of resources that we hope will be of interest to women of a certain age. We will have books written by and for older women, movies where older women are vivid characters, podcasts where the host is an older woman and or the guests tend to be older women, etc. We have organizations that exist to promote the interests of older and past midlife women. All kinds of things will be on there, and that will be launching at the beginning of July. So that's coming right up, and we're excited about that because we've been working on that for years, actually. So that is a whole deal. And it was very much sped up by working with AI to find more resources.
Very good. And how about your books? You mentioned that you've got a few books in progress.
Yes, so the Blood Sisters Chronicles, so far we've published the original one, Vampires of a Certain Age. The upcoming one is about a medieval swordswoman. It's called The Sword of Vivienne. And then there will be more. There will be a sequel to Vampires of a Certain Age that will be about a medieval woman who becomes a barber surgeon. So another career that gives access to blood. So that's all happening. And then your first book at any age will come out hopefully around the beginning of the year. That will be about writing, editing, publishing, and marketing a book after midlife. And then, oh gee, so many more books are coming.
You've got that long to be written stack, right?
I do. It keeps growing. We'll see.
Yeah. Can you recap for our audience for Crone Authors Together? How would people find out about that and find your book? And what's the best way for people to come up to speed on that if they're interested?
Crone Authors Together meets once a month on the last Tuesday of the month, depending on your time zone. For us on the West Coast, it's 10 in the morning. For East Coast folks, 1 in the afternoon. And that is a forum for women authors over 50 to share ideas and successes at reaching audience, at marketing books. And it is hosted by the Grandmother Collective, which is a fabulous organization. And if you get on the Grandmother Collective website, you can find information about Crone Authors Together at the bottom of the homepage. It's also at the bottom of the homepage on my website, www.stellafosse.com.
All right. We'll get those links into the interview that goes out on Substack so people can find them there as well.
Great.
And I need to check out Crone Authors Together and see if I can make it there next Tuesday.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Stella. Appreciate your time and thank you for sharing your thoughts on AI with us.
Yeah, it's been great talking with you. And it's just so fascinating to see how this tool is evolving. I have, of course, mixed feelings about it, as I think many of us do. But part of it really is just fascination with where we're heading with this. So more to come.
Yes, definitely more to come. All right. Thank you, Stella.
Thank you. Take care.
About this interview series and newsletter. This post is part of our AI 6P interview series on AI, software, and wetware. It showcases how real people around the world are using their wetware, brains and human intelligence, with AI-based software tools, or are being affected by AI. And we're all being affected by AI nowadays in our daily lives, perhaps more than we realize. For some examples, see post, but I don't use AI. We want to hear from a diverse pool of people worldwide in a variety of roles. If you're interested in being a featured interview guest, anonymous or with credit, please get in touch. 6Ps and AI Pods, AI 6P is a 100% reader-supported publication. All new posts are free to read and listen to. To automatically receive new AI 6P posts and support our work, consider becoming a subscriber. It's free.